we're going to be looking at the beginning of chapter 8 of John's Gospel. So go right to John 8, verse 1. We're actually going to be starting at John 7:53, but it's easier to look at John 8 and then go back one verse. So this section in John, we have a story that's one of the better known stories that we have in the Bible. This is the story of the woman caught in adultery. Jesus comes across this scene. There's Pharisees, there's teachers of the law, and there's a woman who's been caught in adultery. And they are about to stone this woman to death for this sin of adultery. And they look at Jesus and they say, "Jesus, what do you say? The law of Moses says we're supposed to do this. What do you say?" And he bends over and he writes something in the sand. And then he looks at them and we get one of those, probably the best known verse out of Scripture. Even if you're not a Christian, you probably have heard this verse before. "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." You guys are familiar with that, I'm guessing. That comes from this story right here. It's a very popular phrase. And of course, as Jesus says this, all of the chief priests, the Pharisees, teachers of the law, whoever's there, they realize, well, wait a second, I'm not without sin, and they all drop their stones and they walk away. Jesus then looks up, looks at the woman, and it's just Jesus and the woman, and he says to her, "Didn't they condemn you?" She says, "No." He says, "Then I don't condemn you either. Now go and sin no more." Now, for most of you, if you look in your Bible, this section should be either in brackets or in italics or in some other way set apart. It's not like that in every Bible, so it might not be that way in yours. But this section is generally bracketed or set apart in some way. And there's probably an explanation in there that says something along these lines. The earliest manuscripts and many other ancient witnesses do not have John 7:53 through 8:11. A few manuscripts include these verses wholly or in part after John 7:36, John 21:25, Luke 21:38, or Luke 24:53. So that's in the modern translations. You're going to have a note like that. New International Version, New Living Translation. If you're going from the King James Version of the Bible, you're not going to have that note in there. And we really need to ask why. Why is this set apart? Why is this note there? And to better understand a little bit how this happens, how we kind of have this added story, if you will, not really an added story, but a story put in kind of a different place, we have to look a little bit at Bible translation. We got to look at just the New Testament, thinking just the New Testament now, the Gospels, Acts, all of those letters in Revelation. What language was the New Testament originally written in? Greek. It was written originally in Greek. It was the common language of the time. I want you to raise your hand if you know some ancient Greek. We probably know a little bit, yeah. Probably a few of the letters. The first two letters of the Greek alphabet are alpha and beta. What do we call our collection of letters? Alphabet. That's where we get the word. So alpha, beta, alphabet. There we go. But it was a common language at the time. So for us to understand what was in the Gospels, what was in Acts, what was in all these letters, what was in Revelation, one of two things has to happen here. Either someone has to describe it to us, and this is how it's been done for centuries, because for so long people were illiterate, they couldn't read. Many people just didn't have a copy of the Bible even after it became widely available. So somebody either has to describe it to us, or it has to be translated into our modern language, which of course for us is English. And fortunately, we have people that are very smart that can translate that. I took my six weeks of Greek in seminary, and I'm done. I'm not going back to that. I've had enough. But when people are translating, they use what are called manuscripts. And manuscripts are copies of original writings. None of the original writings have been found. Keep that in mind. The actual letter that Paul wrote to the people in Philippi does not exist, unless maybe the British Museum has it hidden away somewhere, because they've got a lot of that kind of stuff hidden away. But I want to show you a quick photo of part of a manuscript. I know this is really, really hard to see. But if you look at this, if you can tell, this looks like one long run-on word. There are no spaces. There's no punctuation. They're all capital letters. And there's definitely no chapter and verse numbers here. And so that causes a few issues for translators when it comes to doing this stuff. They have to decide how to translate that old text. Do they do a word-for-word translation? Do they do a thought-for-thought translation? Do they do a literal translation? Do they do a paraphrase translation? And there are degrees on this scale for all of that. And a lot of times people are going to say, well, just give me a literal word-for-word translation of what Jesus said and that'll be fine. Well, that's really good in thought, but maybe not so much in practice. This is what's called an interlinear Bible. If you're looking for something that's going to look great on your bookshelf that you're probably never going to pick up, buy an interlinear Bible. It's this pretty blue, got this gold text on the side. It's really pretty. But what the interlinear Bible is, I know you can't see this, but I'm going to hold it up anyway. It has English text, and next to the English text is the original language, so Hebrew or Greek. I don't read from the Hebrew or the Greek, by the way. But underneath the Hebrew or the Greek is the English translation for that word. So this would give you a literal word-for-word translation. Now let me read to you a little bit of a literal word-for-word translation of our text from today. So starting in John 8:12, this is your literal word-for-word translation. Again, then, Jesus to them spoke, saying, I am the light of the world. The one following me in no way will walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. Said then to him the Pharisees, You about yourself witnessed. The witness of you not is true. Answered Jesus and said to them, Even if I witness about myself, true is the witness of me, because I know from I came and where I go, and so on and so forth. Is that clear? Not so much. So that's the challenge a lot of translators have today with figuring out what the manuscript says and what the intention is of that particular passage. Another issue that we have is that language changes. That's why we have to talk about paraphrasing and modern language and translating. When I was in Fargo, I spent a lot of my time pastoring people that were older than me, sometimes much older than me. And that was the language that I was used to hearing. I wasn't used to hearing a lot of new words or new word usage. When I started working at the shelter up in Fargo last January, I started hearing some words that didn't make a lot of sense to me, at least not in the context that I knew them. A guy one day came down to the desk and he says to me, Someone stole my slides. I had no idea what he was talking about. You guys know what slides are? Some of you guys, I'm sure most of you guys do. They're shoes. They're slide-on shoes. I maybe call them sandals, shower shoes, something like that. But I'd never heard that term before. I heard it yesterday, actually, too, which was weird. I was thinking about this all day, and then somebody said, hey, we're missing some slides. Like, oh, okay, I know what that is now. That's good. But I'd never heard that before that time. What do we call a non-alcoholic carbonated beverage? What's our generic name for Pepsi, Coke, Mountain Dew? Pop. Most people said pop. That's the more common word around here. It's soda, more on the coasts. If you look, they've made heat maps of who says what where, which is really fun to look at. And there's a pocket around St. Louis that says soda. And then Chicago, Milwaukee area says soda. And then it's the coasts. And then once you get into the deep south, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, the generic name there for most people is Coke. Yes. Coke. Can I have a Coke? Yes. What flavor? Coke. I just ordered it. But that's what a lot of places will say. You order a Pepsi. What kind of Coke can I get for you? Give me a Pepsi. But language changes based on where you are and when you are. And this is one of those challenges for Bible translators yesterday and today. So back to our story in John about the woman caught in adultery. The note says that this wasn't in the earliest manuscripts. The King James Version of the Bible doesn't have that note. And I do want to say, if you use the King James, I'm fine with that. I think it's an acceptable translation. If you think it's the only valid translation, we've got some work to do. But the King James was originally published, anybody know the year? Quiz time, Jeopardy time. When? 1837? Any other guesses? 1,500 something? I'm not sure which way I'm going for Price is Right rules, but so we're just going to say it. King James Version of the Bible was published in 1611, so 400 years ago. And as far as I know, they used the best available manuscripts to publish the King James. But in the 4th century, since it was published, they found older and older manuscripts that are closer and closer to the original writings. Remember, we don't have any copies of the originals, which would be called autographs. We have copies of copies of copies. Why is that important? I promise you guys I'm going to get to the message here in a little bit. Okay. Why is it important when we think that we have copies of copies of copies? Well, have you ever played the telephone game? I can start over here and I can say something to somebody over here and you can whisper it and it comes all the way through here and it gets over to here. And finally we get all the way over here and it could be either completely different or we could have things added to it or things subtracted from it. I could come over here and I could say, God is love. And it can whisper and it can get all the way over here and we can get over here and it's, well, what was it? Todd is mud, purple monkey dishwasher. That's usually what happens. Now, I'm not saying that manuscripts, that the Bible has gone that far from the original point. I don't believe that's true, right? But we have this idea of going from all of these original writings. There are subtle differences in the manuscripts, and that's one of the challenges that Bible translators have today, is putting that all together. And I was reading a blog earlier by a researcher. His name is Bart Ehrman. He calls himself an agnostic atheist, which I'm not really sure what that means, but that's okay. Calls himself an agnostic atheist, so he's not a believer, but he's a Bible researcher. He has been for years. And he says there's thousands of slight variations in the manuscripts. And then someone asked him, well, are you going to make a translation then? And he said, no, because whatever I do isn't going to be any different than what's already out there. So what we have out there, even with some slight variations in the manuscripts, we have the truth, okay? We absolutely have the truth. So the question is going to come up, what do we do with this story of the woman caught in adultery? Do we just get rid of it? Did it happen? That's the big question. Did this actually happen? If it wasn't in the manuscripts, did it happen? Well, it came from someplace. This is a story that was known to the early church. The people knew that this happened. Everything that happens in that story of the woman caught in adultery fits what we know about Jesus. We have a Jesus who is loving. We have a Jesus who is compassionate. We have a Jesus who offers forgiveness. We have a Jesus that points out the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, of the church leaders of the time. This story happened. It's just that it probably didn't happen at this exact moment in our narrative here in John. So I've said all of this so I could get to this point. We want to look at the context of Jesus saying, I am the light of the world. Remember, context is one of those super important things we got to remember when we're reading. So to understand the context here, we got to know what was happening before the story of the woman caught in adultery. And for that, we go all the way back to the beginning of chapter 7 of John. In the beginning of chapter 7, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem for the Festival of Tabernacles, also known as the Festival of Booths or of Tents. Today, if you hear of the Festival of Sukkot, that's what we're talking about. Sukkot is the same as the Festival of the Tabernacles. A tabernacle is a booth. It's a tent. It's a non-permanent structure. Before the temple was built in Jerusalem, the Ark of the Covenant was placed in the tabernacle as the people brought it, as the Israelites wandered through the desert. If you're at all interested in learning about the tabernacle, I find the New Testament book of Hebrews actually has a lot of information on that. I learned more about the tabernacle in that book than I think I did anywhere else. This festival that Jesus is attending, Sukkot, Festival of Tabernacles, is to remind the Israelites of the wandering through the desert after the Exodus, after they were freed from slavery, but before they reached the Promised Land. If you're wandering, if you're nomadic, you're not going to have a home built of brick or a home built of wood. It's going to be a temporary structure that can fairly easily be taken up and set down. It's easier to set up a tent than to build a house, right? When you go camping, do you build a house? Of course not. No, you bring a tent with you, or you tow your camper, or I'm a hotel camper myself. I don't know how else to put that. But a part of this festival is lighting many torches, many candles every night. And light plays an important role in this Festival of Tabernacles. So remember, if this festival is to remember the Exodus, the Israelites escaping slavery in Egypt, the light plays this vital role. If you remember in Exodus, the Israelites wandered through the desert. During the day, they were led by a pillar of cloud, and at night, they were led by a pillar of fire. It wasn't just a random cloud or a random fire that was leading them. We're told in Exodus 13:21 that by the day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or by night. This is the Lord guiding them. The Lord is present guiding them. He went ahead of them in the pillar of cloud, in the pillar of fire. During Sukkot, during this Festival of Tabernacles, the lights are there to remind the Israelites of the light of God that guided them. So remember that as we continue with this message today, the light represents God. Back at the beginning of chapter 7 of John now, Jesus is reluctant to go to the festival because the Jewish leaders in that area, the Jewish leaders there, were looking for a way to kill him. If I'm thinking of a vacation to someplace and there are people there that want to kill me, I'm probably not going to go. Right? Hey, let's go to Kansas City. No, there's guys looking for me there. I better pass on that. You're not going to make that trip, right? But guess what? Jesus does wind up making the trip to Jerusalem for this festival. It was halfway through the festival, and Jesus goes to the temple courts and he starts to teach. Well, the chief priests and the Pharisees, they don't like Jesus' teaching. They send temple guards there to arrest him. The guards go to Jesus to arrest him, but instead of arresting him, they listen to him. And then, without Jesus, the temple guards return to the chief priests. If you're wondering where I'm at, I've gone through basically the whole of chapter 7. Now I'm up to about 7:45 in John. So the guards get back to the Pharisees, the chief priests, and they look at him and go, well, where is he? We sent you to arrest him. Why didn't you arrest him? And the guard's response is, well, no man has ever spoken the way he does. And the Pharisees' response is, you mean he deceived you also? What are you, stupid? All of us smart guys, we're the smart guys. We know what's going on. We tell you what to do. And we know this Jesus guy is a fraud. But no, you come back here and you say, this guy talks like a smart guy. And you just let him go? And then Nicodemus steps in. You guys remember Nicodemus? In chapter 3, Nicodemus is a Pharisee. In chapter 3, he comes to talk to Jesus. He does it at night, though, because he's scared of the other Pharisees. And this is the conversation that Nicodemus and Jesus have, where in John 3:3, Jesus says, you must be born again. It's in the section that we get John 3:16 and 17. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Nicodemus has shown up before in our narrative, and now he's here trying to defend Jesus a little bit. And he says, well, guys, maybe we should hear him out before we condemn him. And what the Pharisees do here, same thing that they kind of did to the guards, but what the Pharisees do here is so common in so-called debate today, especially online, especially social media today. They don't respond, well, we have heard him and we think he's wrong. They haven't done that. They haven't listened. There is no well-reasoned conversation between Nicodemus and the other Pharisees. They don't say, okay, Nicodemus, maybe you're right, we should go listen to him. Instead, they attack Nicodemus, verbally at least, just like they did to the guards. Nicodemus, what are you, stupid? Are you from Galilee too? A prophet cannot come from Galilee. You should know this. Look it up. Do the research. They tell Nicodemus to shut up. They don't want to listen to him either. So now we're up to the point in John's Gospel where we have this story of the woman caught in adultery. We're going to skip over that, and we're going to get to continuing with Jesus at the festival in chapter 8, verse 12. And we finally get to Jesus saying, I am the light of the world, which is the point of today's message. Are you guys doing okay? You need a little break? We good? Let's keep going? All right. I've said a lot so far to get to the meat and potatoes of this message. I know I have. But I think it's important to know the context of all of this so we can best understand the statement that Jesus is making. He says, I am the light of the world. Let's talk about some of this meaning of light and dark, lightness and darkness in the Bible. All the way back in Genesis, first book of the Bible, right at the beginning. At creation, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and He called the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day. First day, heavens, earth, light, darkness separated out. This was the first day. These were the first things that God did when He created the universe. A little bit further on, starting in Genesis 1:14, and God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. Several years ago, my nephew asked me this question. He said, if God created the sun and the moon and the stars on the fourth day, how could there be light on the first day? It's a really good question, isn't it? It's a really good question. Well, the source of light the first 3 days was God Himself. God Himself is light. God shows up as light in that pillar of fire to guide the Israelites as they fled from their bondage in Egypt. Now let's jump back to John's Gospel, the first chapter. I love reading chapter 1 of John at Christmas time. We don't really think of John 1 as a birth story of Jesus, but it really is, isn't it? In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, the Word became flesh. This is the story of Jesus coming to earth for us, and I love that part. Let's look a little more closely at it. Verse 4 of chapter 1, in Him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Verse 9, the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. When we say in Him or through Him all things were made, in Him was life, that in Him is the Word. Him is the Word. Him is Jesus. Jesus saying, I am the light of the world. They've been at this festival. They're celebrating this festival of tabernacles in Jerusalem, this incredible light show. The lights there are reminding the people of God because God was in that pillar of fire that guided them. In Genesis, God was the light. When Jesus says, I am the light of the world, I think this is one of those statements where Jesus once again is saying, I am God. I am God. So why don't the Pharisees pick up on this? There's been a few other times we've talked about where Jesus says something that alludes to Him being God, and everybody gets angry and they want to stone Him. But He says it here, I am the light of the world. So why don't the Pharisees get angry? The truth is, Pharisees aren't listening to Him. They're not paying attention to what He's saying at all. Remember when the guards came back after not arresting Jesus? Why didn't you arrest him? He had some great things to say. The Pharisees could have said, well, what did he say that was so great? Instead, they insult the guards. You were fooled too? When Nicodemus said, maybe we should listen to this guy, the Pharisees didn't go, okay, well, maybe, yeah, let's give him a chance. Let's hear what he has to say. They said, oh, Nicodemus, are you with him now, you big dummy? Pastor might paraphrase right there, okay? Now, Jesus is saying, I am the light of the world. I am the source of life. At a statement like that, the Pharisees should be looking on the ground trying to find the biggest rocks they can find to start throwing at Jesus, shouldn't they? But they don't. Their response is this: whatever you're saying, Jesus, whatever it is, because we're not actually listening, but whatever you're saying isn't valid because nobody else is saying the same thing. No one else is testifying that that's the truth, so you must be wrong. What? Let's look at that. Part of Jewish law says you need the testimony of at least 2 witnesses for a statement or a claim to be valid. The Pharisees' claim here is that no one else is backing up what Jesus is saying. Whatever he's saying, because they're not listening. But whatever Jesus is saying isn't true because no one else is saying it as well. They don't recognize that the miracles Jesus has performed testify to his claims. They don't recognize that John the Baptist has testified as to who Jesus is. Again, John chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, who is Jesus, so that through him all might believe. And even Jesus doesn't bring this up. He doesn't say, well, my miracles have testified for me. He doesn't say, my friend John testified for me. He looks at the Pharisees and he says, well, guys, if I say it, then my Father says it too. Meaning there's more than one person saying it, which means he's valid. What he's saying is valid. But the Pharisees are still not paying attention. And they say, okay, well, then where's your dad? Is your dad here? I think if Jesus ever had a facepalm moment, this was it. Right? Hey, can we ask your dad about it? Oh, you Pharisees aren't even listening anymore. Jesus is the light of the world. And we contrast that with darkness. Biblically, metaphorically, darkness is evil, darkness is bad. Who is the prince of darkness? Nobody's going to say Ozzy Osbourne for me? Okay. But yes, Satan is the prince of darkness. Satan is the prince of darkness. But we're also told in John's gospel that darkness cannot overcome light. This is a shoebox. It's totally empty. There's nothing in here. It's just empty. It's dark inside this shoebox. So when I open this shoebox up, is the darkness going to spill out? Is the darkness going to spill out and fill this room with darkness? Should we make sure? Yeah. What happened? The light came into the box. The light came into the darkness. That's what we're talking about when Jesus is the light of the world. Jesus overcomes the darkness. Jesus is life. For us, believing in Jesus, following him guarantees us eternal life. No matter where we're at in our life right now, at some point we are going to meet God. It's guaranteed. At some point you're going to meet God. It's either when our earthly body dies, fades away, or it's the day when Jesus comes back, whichever one happens first. We're going to meet God. If you have the light in your life here on earth, you will live in that light for all eternity. As humans, we're really good at arguing about things. We excel at arguing about things. Well, this Bible translation is best. No, this Bible translation is best. No, this Bible translation is best. Yeah, but this is the only one that we should read. Well, my friends, as far as I know, every single one of those translations says Jesus is Lord. Every single one of them says we need to repent of our sins. We need to declare. Every one of them says declare. Shout out loud that Jesus is Lord. We need to believe that Jesus died on the cross so our sins could be forgiven. Every one of those translations says that on the third day, he came back to life. We believe that Jesus is the light of the world. We believe that Jesus is the source of life.